I've spoken to people who fled from North Korea. The things they've told me are horrific. Are you saying these things aren't happening?
Should Scott Lloyd still have a position in HHS?
No, Scott Lloyd should never have had a position.
Politicians are crooked in their own ways. Nobody's like squeaky clean.
Democrats in the House passed their resolution to cancel President Trump's declaration of a national emergency, an attempt to stop Trump from appropriating $8 billion for his border wall. Next, the resolution heads to the Senate, where it needs every Democrat and a fourth Republican to agree to send it to Trump's desk, where he'd be expected to sign his first presidential veto. For the first time in nearly 50 years, Indian fighter jets flew over the border into Pakistan. India's foreign ministry says they destroyed a terrorist training camp and killed a large number of militants. Retaliation for a suicide bombing that killed 40 Indian soldiers in Kashmir this month. Pakistan's military maintains it wasn't involved in the Kashmir attack and said today's airstrikes didn't cause any damage. San Francisco is the first city to attempt to clear all eligible marijuana-related convictions retroactively. The city partnered with a nonprofit to churn through records using an algorithm, dismissing 3,038 misdemeanors and flagging up to 4,940 felony convictions for review. Defendants could have cleared their names themselves after pot became legal in 2016, but that required turning up at a hearing and hiring an attorney, a process that only 23 people attempting to fight the stereotype bothered to do last year. This year's display of diplomacy, nationalism, and Eurobeat, also known as Eurovision, has already had its first falling out. Ukraine blocked the singer who won the country's national vote from performing in the contest because she's performed in Russia. Merev says she was willing to cancel her upcoming tour, but says the national broadcaster wanted her to agree to a contract that would make her a propagandist for the government.
President Trump arrived in Vietnam today to hold his second summit meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump and Kim are scheduled to have a private dinner tomorrow night. They'll then sit down for official meetings on Thursday, with the main topics of discussion expected to be denuclearization and the prospect of closer relations between the two countries. Trump announced plans for the summit earlier this month during his second State of the Union address.
As part of a bold new diplomacy.
그리고 새로운 과감한 외교 정책의 일환으로 미국은 평화를 위한 역사적인 노력을 한반도에서 계속하고 있습니다.
And Kim Ryon-hui will be watching every twist and turn of the negotiations. Kim left Pyongyang 8 years ago, and she's never been back since. Nowadays, she spends a lot of her time in Seoul with other North Koreans, in a house funded by an organization that advocates for their political cause.
그건 트럼프 성과인 것 같아, 전쟁 막은 거는.
That cause is a pretty unusual one. Unlike most of the 30,000 North Koreans living in the South, the people in this house want to go back. Actually, Kim says she never wanted to live in South Korea in the first place.
흔히 남쪽 사람들은 탈북이라고 하는데 탈북자 하는데 저는 탈북자가 아니에요. 탈북자는 뭐 자기가 나서 자란 북이 싫거나 어떤 그 이유로든 원해서 탈북한 사람들이지만
Kim says her story is different. In Pyongyang, she led a relatively privileged life and was allowed to have a passport. So when she was diagnosed with a potentially fatal liver condition, she traveled to China, thinking treatment would be better there, only to find out that she couldn't afford to pay for it. Then, a smuggler offered to sneak her into South Korea to make some money. She was told she could go back home whenever she wanted. That turned out to be a lie.
브로커한테 속아서 북의 여권을 빼앗기고 여기 본인 우사와 반하게 끌려온 사람이거든요.
So right now, do you feel stuck here in South Korea?
그러니까 섬나라에 강제로 옥류되어 있는 거죠. 작년에 배구 팀 나가서 1등 해가지고 찍은 거.
How old is she now?
25살. 그렇죠. 많이.
Kim can't go back home because South Korean law mandates that any North Korean who crosses the border must become a citizen. And South Korean citizens can't even visit the North without government permission. Kim has become the public face of this legal quandary, and she regularly attends protests to have the law changed.
김정은 씨 온다는데 그럼 가야 되는 거 아니야?
갈 때 같이 보내주려고 그러는 거 아닐까요?
그런 꿈이라도 꾸자 우리가.
네.
이분들을 모두 돌아갈 수 있게 준비해 주시기 바라겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Have you ever thought of trying to bring your family from North Korea here so you could live with them here?
남쪽에서 탈북자는 길바닥에 뿌려지는 담뱃재와 같은 존재이다 이런 말을 했거든요. 그래서 나는 못 먹고 못 살아도 떳떳한 삶, 당당한 삶을 살게 해주고 싶다 딸한테. 이렇게 남들한테 어떤 차별된 시선 속에서 힘들게 살게 하고 싶진 않다 이런 생각이 들어요.
That discrimination has made it difficult for Kim to hold a job. So she's turned her strange situation into a profession. Most South Koreans don't know much about the North. Kim writes and gives lectures on what life is like back home.
평양시는 주말에 뭘 하고 지내나요? 라는 질문이요.
네. 여러분들은 주말에 뭐예요? 연애하러 가나요? 같아요. 평양도 처녀청각들은 연애하러 가고요. 아무튼 우리는 유원지 가서 뭐 선풍 치면 놀고 춤추고 불고기 해먹고 아무거나 다 할 수가 있어요.
What did you think about what Ms. Kim had to say?
또 평양이라고 하면 흔히 생각하는 그런 모습들과 많이 다르다는 게 가장 놀랐습니다.
Do you think she should be able to go back?
본인이 원하면 가야 된다고 생각합니다.
통일 한번 합시다. 자, 하나, 둘, 셋.
Kim's rose-colored view of the North often surprises her audience. Because by most accounts, North Korea is the site of egregious abuses of human rights.
Myself, I've spoken to people who fled from North Korea, and the things they've told me are horrific. And are you saying these things aren't happening?
이 땅에서 탈북자들이 살아남자면 무조건 북을 비난하고 북은 사람 못 살 세상 나쁜 나라예요 하는 말을 해야만이 온전하게 살 수 있지. 탈북자들이 온전한 진실을 말한다면 그 사람들은 감옥 가야 되는 길인데 탈북자 중에서도 북에서 어떤 잘못된 어떤 아픈 추억을 가지고 있는 사람들도 혹시 있을 수 있어요. 그렇다고 해서 90%가 순금인데 10%의 불순물이 섞였다고 해서 그게 금이 아니라고 평가할 수는 없어요.
I think there's a lot of people who would listen to what you're saying, that you want to go back to North Korea and say, this person's been brainwashed. What would you say to that?
근데 제가 남쪽에 가서 보니까 진짜 세뇌당한 사람들은 남쪽 사람들이 아닐까. 어떻게 세계가 이렇게 돌아가는데 남쪽 사람들은 그 세상을 다 보면서도 어떻게 북에 대해서 이렇게까지도 모르고 있을까. 완전히 세뇌당했다 이런 생각이 들거든요.
Kim's only real hope at the moment is that Trump will reach a deal that will let her go back.
저선술이 하나밖에 없다고 하면서 그래서 내가 무조건 그거 내놔라. 아 그래? 작년에도 정말 하루하루가 좀 한해 정말 좀 놀라운 사변들이 많았는데 올해는 더 세계를 널리울 그런 정말 세계 평화를 가져올 수 있는 이런 획기적인 전변이 일어나지 않을까 이런 생각을 하고요. 60년 거의 다 되었는데 올해는 꼭 가족의 품으로 돌아가시기 바라고요. 자, 네, 우리 선생님 모두 건강을 위하여.
위하여.
네.
잘 다녀오세요.
Trump fixer and turncoat Michael Cohen arrived on Capitol Hill today for a closed-door hearing in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a kind of warm-up for open testimony tomorrow in the House, where he reportedly plans to accuse President Trump of criminal activity while in office, likely paying Cohen back for paying off Stormy Daniels. The hearings are the first big splash in the Democrats' oversight of the Trump-Russia scandal since taking the House back. But headline-grabbing as the Russia stuff is, there are a lot of policy fights that Democrats actually care more about. One of those is the administration's separation of families at the border. At a hearing on the zero-tolerance policy today, House Judiciary Committee members aimed some of their most pointed questions at Scott Lloyd, the former director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
It's real simple, sir. Did you ever just say, this really goes against humanity? We should not be doing this to children?
Lloyd first emerged as the face of the administration's questionable treatment of immigrants when he tried to block abortions for several girls in his agency's care, even in the case of rape. Then, as the family separation crisis unfolded, it became clear Lloyd hadn't given much thought to tracking the children who were taken from their parents. When Republicans controlled the House, Lloyd never had to answer for the separation crisis. Instead, he quietly transferred to another role within Health and Human Services. But with Democrats in charge now, Lloyd was today's example that any Trump administration incompetence or perceived cruelty from the first 2 years is going to get a reckoning.
How long did it take for you and ORR to notice that there were no tracking of which parents were separated from what children?
And the tracking that occurred within our normal case management system as part of.
So how long was that, sir?
I'm sorry?
How long did it take?
It was
for you and ORR to notice that there was no tracking of which parents were separated from their children.
Sure. Again, I would disagree with your characterization.
Commander Jonathan White, a uniformed public health officer who's ORR's deputy director for children's programs, also faced some questions. But he only put more heat on his former colleague, testifying that Lloyd ignored warnings about the effects of separating children, all while sitting right next to him.
Subsequently, the issues were resurfaced in late summer as we began to see indications that increased separations were occurring. Although it was our understanding that there was no policy to affect separation, I raised concerns with the director of ORR and HHS leadership at that time as well. I raised those issues on a number of occasions, primarily prior to Mr. Lloyd's arrival and also his arrival.
Democrats ran with that.
Mr. Lloyd, you were the head of ORR, the primary agency tasked with caring for these children. When Commander White, as a child welfare expert, warned you about the cruel consequences of family separation, were you concerned? Yes or no is fine.
I accepted what he told me.
And Mr. Lloyd, you are the head of this agency at the time of family separation, and you did not even allow your staff to continue to do a spreadsheet that tracked where people were. You did not put into place any policies that would pull this I don't even have words for it, horrendous policy back. Did you ever say to the administration, this is a bad idea? Here's what my child welfare experts have told us. We need to stop this policy. Did you once say that to anybody above you?
To answer your last question, I did not say those words.
We spoke with Representative Jaya Paul after she questioned Lloyd. Did you learn anything today that added value or that surprised you?
I don't think I learned anything, but I heard them tell me to their faces that they knew the concerns had been raised and they did nothing to prevent this policy from being enacted.
Should Scott Lloyd still have a position in HHS?
No, Scott Lloyd should never have had a position. He has no healthcare experience, he has no social work experience, he has no refugee experience. He is absolutely unqualified.
People are voting for mayor in Chicago today. And for the first time in a very, very long time, no one knows who's going to win. The guy who was supposed to win, incumbent Mayor Rahm Emanuel, suddenly dropped his bid for a third term last September.
I've decided not to seek re-election.
You can trace this moment in Chicago back to October 2014, when Officer Jason Van Dyke shot 17-year-old Laquan McDonald 16 times.
16 shots! 16 shots! 16 shots!
Protests helped lead to the indictment and conviction of Van Dyke.
Justice for the crime! Justice for the crime!
And then they helped push Emanuel to drop out, creating a power vacuum. 21 candidates rushed in to fill it. 14 of them ended up on the ballot. A candidate needs 50% plus one vote to become mayor of Chicago, making an April runoff all but inevitable.
If we don't get it, shut it down! If we don't get it, shut it down!
14 candidates sounds like a lot of choice. But it doesn't feel that way for the protesters who brought this moment on.
There's no justice in Chicago, but we're here to fight for our justice and to demand it.
They want fundamental change, but it can be hard to figure out who's going to make that happen.
Candidates, thank you so much.
This is a democratic city, so when candidates meet at forums, it can be hard to find substantive differences. More government funding for HIV prevention?
Yes. Yes.
Of course.
Term limits for aldermen?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
They all try to embrace the cause of the protest movement that created this election in the first place.
As mayor, will you abolish the gang database that racially profiles our communities?
Yes.
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 19-year-old organizer Taylor Norwood, who grew up on Chicago's South Side, is experienced in reactive street protest and skeptical of politics.
The people who are running for mayor have been in politics for a long, long time. A lot of these campaigns are building themselves on the idea that they're going to drastically change the experience for Black and brown youth. And from their track record, we know that's not true.
But she also wants to keep her movement at the center of the election.
So our Get Out to Vote event is on Wednesday, February 6th. So we'll be having a concert. Also, we're going in and doing our civics engagement classes. Make sure that we're networking and that we're getting people online so that they can register, so that on February 26th, we can really push who we need to push into office, right?
So have you ever done a campaign before? Have you ever done electioning before?
No, actually, and I think that's what's really pure about it, is this is the first time for a lot of our youth here.
And now you're going to try to learn it and also change it at the same time.
Exactly. You got to beat people at their own game, but you are learning the game as you go. And I think that's what makes this so monumental.
For Taylor and a lot of protesters, the candidate of choice is community organizer Amara Enya. She bills herself as an activist just like them, and she's trying to be Chicago's version of the outsider come-from-behind progressive. Enya is banking on there being a new generation of voters, energized by the Laquan McDonald movement and the desire for change.
It is important that we stand unified across race, across ethnicity, across generations.
Her biggest donor is one of the most powerful youth voices in the city.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Chance the Rapper.
What's up, y'all? Let's get down to business. Where's the phones at, yo?
We're actually up against the resistance to change, and we're up against the resistance to institutions that, quite frankly, haven't been beneficial across the board. I think that's the biggest thing that we're up against, is the status quo.
Hey, I'm calling because I'm doing this phone banking thing right now for Amara Enya. You know what that is?
Can you put us in sort of this moment in time in Chicago politics?
We had a previous mayor for 20 plus years. Then we had 8 years of our current mayor. And finally, people are saying we actually have a choice to determine the kind of leadership that this city has. And that leadership is going to determine the kind of city that we have.
What's your actual plan to defeat the establishment?
Our strength has been that we are right aligned with the sentiment of Chicago in 2019. And that means that we have a level of enthusiasm that will bring out voters, people who say, this is what I can come out for. That's very unique, and I think it's what will help us to be successful in spite of having several machine-backed candidates.
That machine is the Chicago machine, the invisible thing that has controlled this city for as long as anyone can remember.
Brown, all right. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Dorothy Brown is the elected clerk of court and has been running for office in this city for decades.
Well, Chicago politics is very cliquish and clannish, and when you want to be an independent person like myself, it's somewhat of an uphill battle.
When you say cliquish, you mean like, is that the machine we always hear about, or
It's
what?
the Chicago machine. It's the old boys and girls club.
The machine is the old way of doing things. The Enya supporters worry that a lot of the top-tier candidates running are fine with that old way. There's Willie Wilson, a self-made millionaire who campaigns at black churches with his own band.
Give for the church, total $5,000.
And his checkbook. Bill Daley, the brother of one former Chicago mayor and the son of another former Chicago mayor.
Bill Daley has spent his whole life in Chicago.
His campaign is well funded, and it's one of the most visible, thanks to an expensive blanket of TV ads. Susana Mendoza, the state comptroller.
I think we've had a really good day today. We're going to close it out with a bang.
Her campaign is banking on this city's growing Latino population.
Entonces sí contamos con su apoyo para Susana.
Lori Lightfoot,
Thanks everyone for gathering. We are really, really pushing hard.
who's been talking about fixing the Chicago Police Department for years. And Tony Preckwinkle.
Good morning. The meeting of the Cook County Board of Commissioners will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
She's the closest thing this race has to a frontrunner. She's the president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, and also the head of the Cook County Democratic Party. If that sounds like a machine campaign, it is. Preckwinkle is backed by all the major unions. She says that if she wins, the machine will get a full reboot as a positive force for Chicago.
I was first elected committeeman in 1992. I mean, frankly, the only people who were being slated in those days were people who were in the majority, the white guys. I mean, that's who the party slated for office after office. And in more recent times, the party has slated women, people of color, African Americans, people in the Latinx community, Asian Americans, people who are LGBTQ. I mean, the party is a quite different entity than it was in 1992, for which I'm grateful. And under my leadership, I want to continue to move it in a progressive direction.
Everybody is promising Chicago voters they're going to move the city in a progressive direction. Taylor and the group she represents, Good Kids Mad City, believe only one of the candidates means it.
Before there was an election, the fight was going on. After the election, the fight will continue. So the question for us is, who stands with you? Where's Good Kids Mad City?
They don't like the way the establishment is discussing the movement on the campaign trail.
It was Tony who made sure Laquan McDonald's autopsy went public. Tony, who called for the dash cam footage to be released.
Do you feel that you owe Chicago and its organizers an apology for running the ad that you did?
It's not really about the ad. I want to thank the community activists who worked so hard for almost 400 days to be sure that the truth got out and we got justice for Laquan. So thank you.
But activists in Chicago worked over 400 days for Laquan justice. Ms. Preckwinkle, how dare you get on the television and claim credit for something that had nothing to do with you?
But for Taylor and GKMC to actually have a voice in this election, they have to get teenagers to do something teenagers almost never do: vote.
We, as a collective, can put whoever we want in office. And that's why you guys have to use your voice.
That can be a tough sell in Chicago.
Our vote really don't matter. Like, we vote and then we don't get no justice. We don't get nothing. What do we get?
They're not gonna listen though.
They
My
might not
generation
listen
is
to
brainwashed.
one person. Yeah. But if everybody is saying the same thing, everybody's not gonna tell you the same lie. I don't get upset or thrown off when we go and we talk to kids and they're like, man, fuck what you talking about. You seen 4, 5, 6 of your homies be shot and your mama ain't got no job, like you done been evicted out your house, it's cops harassing you every day, and you mean to tell me that this one person is gonna get rid of that after all these years? That's some bullshit. I mean, growing up, if this is all you know, that's what you believe. You believe what you see. It's almost like living in 2 separate cities because there just is a whole lot of like segregation and like racism. It's all very subtle. There's a lot of kids growing up here who wouldn't even think that you know, the things that affect them every day are a result of a system that has been set in place for them to not have the same opportunities.
Good Kids Mad City tries to take advantage of this moment with events for youth to get pumped up about voting for Enya, like a series of open mic nights.
The future mayor of Chicago, Dr. Martin.
And a Get Out the Vote rally at a club.
Give it up for the Get Out the Vote concert!
But other than the kids who organize the events, basically no one shows up.
Crowd's not that big.
Even if it's not, we on social media with it, we're still letting everybody know. The show still gotta go on. You gotta get out the vote.
Taylor cast her vote early.
This is a very important day for me. I think we're at a really pivotal time in Chicago right now.
What have you learned?
It's really hard to get people interested in voting. Politics are hard, but it's mostly older people who are interested. Politicians are crooked in their own ways. Nobody's like squeaky clean. You just kind of gotta feel your way through that.
So what do you think that you've accomplished?
It's raising awareness, especially to youth. Even if their first step isn't getting out to vote today, it might just be them starting to define a little bit of interest in why voting is important and what that looks like in their city.
Taylor doesn't think Enya will get the youth votes she hoped for. No one can predict which two candidates make it to the next round. Turnout is expected to be low across the board.
Next 4 years in Chicago, they're gonna be better than the last 4 years?
Yes, and we're gonna make sure of it. Because regardless of who's in office, they're gonna have to deal with us.